So thank you all for joining us. We are with Luca Morini. He's talking about who makes the rules, who's getting played, games and play and decolonizing education. So I've been trying to decolonize my classrooms and make the learning more inclusive and reduce the power differentials, since decolonization, the colonization legacy is about power, who has it, who doesn't have it. And about at the same time, I was trying to also incorporate play into my classrooms. And initially those two didn't connect for me. But as I started seeing the outcomes from including play in my classrooms, I started seeing some connections between what you would want in a decolonized class. You get that with play. So I actually saw Luca speak at a workshop this past fall called Rebellious Playfulness. And within there, he talked about decolonization just briefly. So David and I connected with him, and I think he has some really great ideas to share, and I think he would be great to lead this conversation. So here we are, and I will turn it over to you, Luca.
Thank you, Lisa. And well, thanks everyone for being here. I shared a link a few seconds ago. I don't know if everyone saw that, but I'll start sharing my screen now, just so that I can explain a couple things. So you can follow me either on the actual whiteboard or through the shared screen, whichever you prefer. My preferred presentation software, which is Prezi, stopped working in the older version. So I'm trying to do something new here. I'm trying to do something on a whiteboard so that you can annotate in real time. Now, if you look at the top left of the screen, there's a kind of a post-it thing, and you should be able to pick up post-its from there and move around. But for now, I will start doing a classic presentation. Happy to see post-its appear. Yeah, I see some post-its appearing. Okay, well, first of all, I'll briefly introduce myself. My name is Luca Morini. I work at the Institute for Global Learning. It was Center for Global Learning until literally last week. Now it's Institute for Global Learning in Coventry University. And we have quite a broad portfolio about internationalization and equality. And part of my work is really at the crossroads between playfulness, technology, decolonization, and sustainability. It's many different things which make perfect sense for me together, but sometimes it's not that straightforward. The first thing I want to address is really the elephant in the room, which is why is another white European male here to talk us about decolonization? And on one hand, what I want to say is that, yes, that's true. And although I tend to identify myself as Mediterranean and I am a migrant, so I don't stand by the usual expectations of the white British male, that is seriously a concern. But still, and I want really to start presenting here. And I'll summon everyone here. So as I often do, to explain my positionality with respect to this, I'm quoting this poem from Maha, who is with us, and thank you, Maha, for joining us. I don't know if it's okay that I read your poem here with you here, but I will just do it, if that's okay. Just to say that no one should feel guilty because they were born white, just as no one should feel guilty because they were born brown. But every day you have the responsibility to speak out against injustice, to question your own action, and to consider your own words. And if you don't know how to make it right, I suggest you shut up, or you'll just make me more angry. What I try to do here through my work, through play, is to question my own actions. I found that games are a great way of reflecting about one's own actions, because they are structured, but they're also very closely linked to culture. but I am very happy to be shut up at any point if I say something that is inappropriate or is not in the direction of speaking against injustice. So I absolutely wanted to start with this to set the scene. Moving on, I want to talk to you about a story that is about my research work, and it's a complicated story of many types of coloniality crossing and meeting. We did quite a lot of work in Malaysia, particularly in Sarawak, so in Malaysian Borneo. We were called there to do two different things. We were called there to promote computational thinking, but also to provide ways of preserving the cultural heritage of native population. Now, Sarawak, like the rest of Borneo and the surrounding parts of Malaysia and Indonesia, are extremely ethnically diverse. Some of this population might be quite isolated, and there is an awareness that some of those cultures might go extinct in a few years. So we were called there, and that was in a way weird since the beginning. It's like what exactly is the government asking from us? And I think nowhere else in this project this was interesting and evident as in Long Lamai. Long Lamai is a small village at the edge of Indonesia in the jungles of Borneo. This is Penang land. The Penang are a semi-nomadic population that crisscrosses the country. They don't really care about the boundaries of the state. They were completely nomadic until 50 years ago. Now they are more or less settling because the state is asking them to settle, and these are their lands, and this is the village where we stayed some time to work with them about these two topics of cultural heritage and computational thinking. And you are in that village in the jungle. We had to take two planes, 3 hours in a boat, and then walk a bit, and we got there. And it's like, okay, what are we doing here exactly with computational thinking? What is happening? And this is because I did, before doing this presentation, obviously I talked again with the people from Malaysia that we worked with. And just yesterday I had this wonderful quote from one of the local researchers, and she was saying, the school is its own country. So the Malaysian state, which still has a lot of heritage from the British Empire, sets up schools in these remote areas, but the culture is completely different. So the children stay there for the time of the term, and then when the term is done, they run into the jungle and meet the parents there. So it's a kind of a split life, and this was reflected in our activities there. What we try to do and what we really were intending to do is to try and remix, as we said, in a modern way or in a more shareable way, something that is very local, something that is very traditional. So the Penang have a kind of a stick language. So they use elements of nature like leaves or sticks to leave messages in the forest for people who might need to know where a water source or some good hunting area is. We try to work with the children and the teachers there to make this into something that could be parted out. But at the same time, because there was that mandate about computational thinking, we also brought in games of other lengths. So quite a few shiny toys that got some interest, some robotics. And I was looking at this, and I was always perceiving this tension. What exactly are we doing here? And we were talking with especially some of the elders of the village were teachers themselves. And they were saying, our children need to learn the ways of the external world, but they also don't need to not lose what is happening here. And I was always wondering, is it really possible? Oops. Something else that we did to try and join these two aspects is to build games about representing the land in a way that was slightly more computational. This is a very interesting paper that came out 5 days ago, I think, about trying to bridge these two ways of seeing the land. But always there was this unease. And when we were coming back in the plane, when we were going there, the weather wasn't that good, so we couldn't see. When we were coming back, we saw this. And this is really what the bigger game that was being played around not only our project, but many projects that are set up there with the intent of developing these areas. So the jungles of Borneo are the field of a logging war, more or less, where many foreign countries play against each other and struggle against each other to try and get access to that. The Penan have some precarious grasp over the land, in that their rights are protected, but to a degree. And so we did realize partly that one of the objectives of our project was to pull them out, really. We go there, we show them things from the outside, and the government was really hoping that, well, maybe we can convince a few of them to leave. And once they leave, once they go to Kuala Lumpur or to Kuching, maybe they won't come back. And then we can use that land in another way. And I thought that this was really a very Western way of looking at how you divide and manage the land. That is not unlike many Western games. Many Western games are about that dividing and conquering the land to make it manageable for the economic extraction. And so we were working with games there in the place, but also there was a bigger game being played around us that we didn't really understood at the time. And again, this is a tradition of Western gaming paradigms, and this is an old game now. I can't remember the exact date of this one. Must be the early part of the 20th century. Very explicit about this colonial element of dividing, conquering, transforming into materials that can be used by the empire. Now I'll take a step back to link it more closely to colonial or decolonial theory. This is a mapping from Andreotti, Stein, Ahenakew, and Hunt about some different stages of understanding how decoloniality might be framed. What I found immediately interesting, given my years spent in researching game, was this metaphor. This is very explicit. So when we are in a soft reform space, which is where many diversity and inclusion programs in our institutions are, so we think we can address problems through institutional change. And the metaphor here in this paper is that the game is awesome and everyone can win once we know all the rules. Then there comes a realization of epistemological hegemony. And that epistemological hegemony is racism, is capitalism, is colonialism, is many different things. And that's where we realize that the game is rigged. So if we want to win, we need to change the rules. But is it about winning or losing? And that's where the realization of ontological hegemony comes in. It's not just about racism or capitalism as ideology. It's about sovereignty. It's about the land being dispossessed and the people being dispossessed, as we saw. And here we see that the game is harmful and makes us immature, but we're stuck playing. And a metaphor in this area that I found particularly valuable is that of hacking. We can hack institutional systems, we can hack cultural systems, but it's easier to move into that space if we start to try and understand some of the game-like elements. That's pretty much my whole argument. So what I'm interested here is in the hacking of institutions. And here's another theoretical point. This is Donella Meadows' model of leverage point, or places to intervene in a system. There's lots of intervention that are about numbers or resources. There's not a lot of interventions that are at a deeper systemic level. And if you look at how some of these are framed, so system rules, system goals, designing systems, this very easily translates into understandings of game design. So when we look as systems as games, as systems of exploitations as games, we can understand some of those rules and goals, and maybe we can start applying some leverage. And this is one of the really basic paradigms of Western game design, as I was sharing before. Zero-sum games. I win, you lose, we are opponent, and that's how things are really. And this is applied very much to how universities are managed. Now, I saw that there's lots of people from different countries in this meeting today, which is absolutely great. We are all under the hegemony of university rankings in some capacity. In Britain, they are absolutely obsessed with ranking everything. We have league tables about regional university, everything is first, second, and beyond. So here we have this quote where university managers are playing fantasy football with the institution. So they are translating the complexity of institution into something that can be played like Risk or like the game of the British Empire. They know nothing about how it actually works and spend time obsessing about data that is poorly collected and badly interpreted. So the argument here is really that they play these games, but these games are also poorly designed because they are not designed with an awareness of how game design can lead to different outcomes. And the current outcome of this is that, like with the games of territorial conquest that I was discussing before, we have a complete skew of so-called excellent world-leading universities that are concentrated in a few countries. There's even more skew towards countries of Anglo-Saxon heritage, and those are the ones that get to set what the rules of the game are for everyone else. Now back to coloniality more explicitly. This is a great game, Dog Eat Dog by Liam Lewanach-Burke. It's interesting because the author is from the same area in the South Asian, South Pacific area that I was discussing before. The game is a narrative game where you start with one rule, which is a very cruel rule. The natives are inferior to the colonists. Whatever you narrate in the game, one player plays the colonizer and all the others play the colonized. Everyone has to go by the rules. If you play by the rules, you get to add other rules. But since this one is the basic one, then the only way you can win and try and set rules against the colonizer is to really stand by the basic one. It's a very impressive game to play. It's a very cruel game, and I think they conveyed some of the aspects of the cruelty of colonialism in an accessible manner. The focus here is really on rules, which is what I was discussing before as one of the leverage points. And speaking of this, I would propose to you the first activity to be taken in breakout rooms. Let's try and do something similar to what was proposed here. So here are some rules, and let's play this decolonial game. So try and reflect on every rule you saw written, spoken, or implied in your institution in the last few days. You score a point for each rule you discover or reasonably guess the origin of. And then we can have a discussion of which places and processes have the most rules and who made the most rules. So if someone can, I stop sharing my screen for a moment because I prefer seeing the faces, but most of you should be in that online document, and then we can add some post-it there about this. I'll restart sharing my screen. I see some rules have appeared on the whiteboard, which is great. I'll start sharing again, just so that people that can't access the whiteboard can. So I'll take a quick moment to consider what I see, and then let's have a more open discussion. These are from our room, so it's easier for me. So keep assessing people as we always did, which is certainly a room that was made at some point by old white men, and the vice chancellor must like the changes we want to make, or the director, depends on the boss of your institution. But I would argue that in most cases that's another old white man. Let's see what else. Students are responsible for their own learning. That's the rule in theory, but in reality we spoon feed them. COVID rules changing so much on campus with teaching. I don't know about the situation in other countries. Here in the UK, I'm sorry, but I will keep repeating myself. COVID rules are made by white old men mostly, and has been shown, at least here in the UK, that the impact of COVID has been disproportionately on so-called minority ethnic, but actually global majority communities. Yeah, so that was really what I was trying to hint at. Another discussion that we had, and that I see in a lot of this, is that there are explicit rules that are talked about all the time, and then there are implicit rules. There are hidden rules, or reality, as some people have wrote, that point us in another completely different direction. Could we have a quick round of the something from everyone? Now, I don't know who was in which room, so you will have to self-manage this. Who wants to start? Oh, I see lots of activity in the chat and on the whiteboard, but please do also tell us about it. Anyone? It's a nice and informal session. You don't need to be scared.
Okay, I'll get us started if that's okay.
Thank you.
Because mine is a big one. So my institution is basically a colonialist institution. It's the American University in Cairo. So it's an American institution in Egypt. You can see it in turquoise right now. Someone posted the post-it for me. Thank you, Jess or Irene or whoever managed to do it. So we're in Egypt, and we are not allowed as professors or students to speak any language other than English in the classroom, unless it's a course about Arabic language or Arabic literature. And so So in my breakout room, folks were like, "Why do you have that rule?" And I was like, "That's a good question. I mean, it's a colonialist institution. I assume it's because you could have obviously faculty who are from America or from other countries who don't speak any other language but English, and you can have international students. But actually, the reality is that a lot of times I'm an Egyptian professor with Egyptian students, and I personally break that rule all the time. And I always tell people, don't tell anyone, but I actually think we need to change it into a bilingual institution. And I don't know why I haven't done anything about it yet.
The rule of language is very interesting. It's very deep. As a migrant, I think one of the things that annoys me most about English is that in my native language I have a verb for knowledge of things and another verb for knowledge of truths. Now, how do I talk of epistemology in English? I still don't know exactly, because I don't have the basic blocks that are wired into my brain and my basic language. But that's a huge point, Maha. Thanks. Anyone else who wants to share? It's great if you can, because there's so much to be said, but no one is forcing you. Oh, nice little heart there.
I'll chip in with something. It's to do with social media. So our institution, Derby UK, doesn't have a staff social media policy, yet there's an unwritten rule about making negative comments about your own institution. And I've seen instances where people have done that and been reprimanded, and I'm sure it's similar to others. And we all put this little disclaimer on the top of our Twitter which says, any views I express are my own and not reflective of my institution, as if that makes things all right.
My sometimes colorful language about politics has been noted. Again, it's a civic duty in Italy to use colorful language about politics. In the first circle of the Inferno of Dante, there were people who wouldn't publicly take a stand. So you see, we sometimes we take stupid stands, but it's a strong cultural characteristic, and it's not necessarily the same here. So yeah, that's another big point. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else? Maybe at least another couple. It would be great.
I'll share that I'm the one that put the little circle up there about unwritten rules about what is academic and scholarly, because I was sharing, I have a doctorate in nursing practice. So I have a DNP and I'm going for a PhD, so I'm getting a second doctorate, and I'm working on my dissertation, and for my dissertation, I want to implement play and games into online learning. And in doing this, I was talking to my program director and I said, let's put some play and games into the online education. And I was told, oh, no, we can't do that. And I said, well, I'll do it at bachelor's level, and it was okay. I said, let's put it in the doctoral level program as well. And I was told, nope, we can't do that. It's not scholarly to play games at a doctoral level and to play. So I feel like there are a lot of unwritten rules about what is academic and scholarly.
And again, those rules were made by old white men at some point. Although I think in this case, as someone who's been working in games for quite a while, it's a lot about the community you're working in. So if you can reach out, there's so much scholarly work about games, which seems really unfair what they're telling you. But yeah, I think it's a great point about the unwritten rules of what is academic and scholarly. One more, last but not least, and thank you for sharing all this. I will share the link. We will share the link for the presentation afterwards, so you can keep going through the notes or adding more. Anyone else who wants to share something? That's okay. That's okay. Let's move on then. Thanks for sharing all these rules. Now, we discussed the rules. We were having this conversation in the breakout room about how this is a different way of looking at games and playfulness. Yes, I'm looking at some formal elements of game creation that I think have seeped in our lives in general under neoliberal capitalism, but even before that. And I hope that this looking at rules helps. We'll do something similar again, but a bit broader later. But for now, I'll just, I prepared some of those rules, if just in case people were shy. So here are some examples, and it's interesting that this is the first one. I mean, I didn't prepare this while Maha was talking. This was prepared before. So it's great that the first one that came up is shut up and listen to English. That's definitely one of the legacies of the empire, that the language of academy and scholarship, yes, it's still English. And I think we're missing out so much on different ways of knowing. Then there are more general ones. So the world is to be divided and ruled. There are always winners and losers, and that's more about university management, about how universities stand with regards to each other, but also about students. In the UK, the discourse of employability is pretty much all-encompassing, and it is about making students able to fully participate in the race and be winners in that race, disregarding whatever structural disadvantage might be subject to. And education in this framework becomes a tool to win. Education helps you specifically win, and that's why you pay for it in countries where you pay for it. In countries where you don't pay for it, for example, in Denmark, we work quite closely with Denmark on playful topics, but also in general on education. You can see in some of the countries that provide free education still have this competitive framing, where students in Denmark are paid to study. However, places in universities are decided by those subjects that are assumed to make Denmark as a whole more competitive. And again, it's down to this competition against everyone else. It's that dog-eat-dog philosophy that was implied in the game shared before. And this is how things are. This is very dangerous, but we also saw this very much in your comments. You said, this is the declared rule, but this is the reality. I'm sorry, I need to be a bit harsh. This is not the reality. This is how historical contingency and political choices have brought us to. This is how things are now. The most dangerous one. This is how things should be. And I think that at least in this space, because we are people that are discussing decolonization and playfulness, I think we are people that want things to be different in some way. But if we want things to be different, I think it's dangerous to fall into this is how things are in terms of a statement of reality. Yes, it's how they are now, but of the history of it. Speaking of history, who knows what game is this one? And yes, it's written somewhat. If someone knows something more, just stand up and say it. Otherwise, I'll give you a few seconds and I'll move on. I'll have a look at the chat too. Land game, Monopoly, 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 Monopoly. Well, yes and no. Yes and no. It's the landlord's game. Yes, it's written on there. This is the predecessor of Monopoly. So the original version actually was made to be a political argument. And that's why I would argue that the current Monopoly has many issues. But you need to look at the history. Like we tried to look at the history of rules, you need to look at the history of games. Elizabeth Maggi was a Fabian socialist and created this game to try and make an argument about the problems that come with concentrating too much wealth and especially too much land. And we come back to the land, really, much land in the end of only one person. There's lots of issues, and you see that with monopoly. The people that are winning are increasingly likely to win, and it's just a positive feedback cycle. Again, going back to systems thinking, it's a positive feedback cycle, but it takes a lot. It takes a lot to reach its end, and there's no real counterbalances. But the thing is, that is one of the two sets of rules that were part of the game at the beginning. The landlord's game, the original landlord's game, had a competitive rule set, which is what we now know with a few changes as monopoly. But the landlord's game also had a cooperative rule set. In the cooperative rule set, people started with different amounts of wealth. If you try and do that in monopoly, it's quite an interesting way to teach how inequality works. But the original rule set, cooperative rule set for the landlord's game, worked like this. Someone has 50, someone has 100, someone has 200. There is a huge amount of taxation on land now. So the people who get more land are forced to pay lots and lots of tax to redistribute the wealth. And once the poorest player has doubled their wealth, everyone wins. And this is different. This is very different from what we are used to consider a board game even. Now, there's been recently a board game renaissance with many, many different designs coming up. One of the most famous cooperative board games is Pandemic, which is very timely right now. And it is about that we all win or lose together. It's very interesting that when the original set of rules of the landlord's game was acquired by sorry, it's late in the day for me. It wasn't Hasbro, it was someone else at the time. They just pulled out the cooperative rule set. They kept and emphasized the competitive rule set, and that's how board gaming for the rest of the century became. And that's a way of colonizing thinking, really. You export ways of thinking about the economy everywhere in the world through a well-known game. So I encourage, you can find the old rule set online. I encourage you to dig up the old cooperative rule set. It's an old game. It's not very well refined, but in terms of a concept, in terms of political education, and in terms of education about ownership of the land, which is very close to what decolonization should be more about, rather than staying on the surface of culture, is a very interesting piece of history. Now, I want to. It was the Parker brothers. Sorry, it was the Parker brothers acquiring the intellectual property for the landlord's game. Now, I have discussed games all the time. All the time I have discussed game, I want to discuss play a bit. And this is quoting from Bernie de Koven, who wrote the Well-Played Game, and I had the great luck to meet a few years ago when he came to Europe, I think the last time, sadly. He makes a very important distinction. There is a game community where the rules and the officials decide if the players are good enough to play, and if not, they change the players. So what we see, for example, with my initial example in Malaysia, is that the Penang are not participating in the game of the economy. They're not participating in the logging industry. So what the government tries to do very subtly, using development projects, is to change the players, to get them to get involved in the global economic market system, and then become productive, not just stay there and use the land for the ancient ways, but innovate, become new, change. The opposite, Bernie argued, is the play community. In the play community, the players together decide, is this game fun enough? Does it make sense? And a lot of the games we play as part of our institution, a lot of the games that were set up with the rules by old white men, we love parts of our work. We love parts of the game we play in our institutions, because that's who we are, that's what we do. But there's lots of them that don't make a lot of sense. So why can't we change the game? And that's the play community. The players decide if the game is fun enough to play. If not, we change it. And just a small anecdote and a distinction. Some of you have already seen the cow. I always use the cow. The cow was something that was used by the director of a place where I worked previously. So every 2 weeks, we had to share what we did in the last 2 weeks and what we would do in the following weeks. Very, very strict system of monitoring what we were supposed to do. And if you didn't do that in 2 minutes, you got the cow thrown at you. But look at the cow, how fluffy and nice it is. So once I said, I just wanted to talk, I want to say something more. And then when I was getting close to the 2 minutes, I said, okay, throw me the cow. I want to be thrown the cow. I like the cow, I want to play with the cow. So that's about that important distinction. Is games and training are feedback systems. Those are the rules and the goals. Well, play and education, it should be about pushing against those rules and promoting, setting new goals. So in this case, playing with the cow, not just telling you everything I did in 2 minutes. And I think this is the other part of the conversation that I would love to have with you now. We discussed the rules, but we need to go a bit higher. And sorry, I need to do this very quickly. So we discussed the rules, and that is the easiest introduction of framing things as games to try and understand how they work. Now, what I'm interested to look at with you is to look at these higher leverage points. So the system goal and the paradigm used to design the system and the power to shift paradigms. The paradigm, the shorthand for it, we could say, who is designing it. So let's go for another round. Maybe we can take around 10 minutes for this one. Let's play the decolonized university. So just like when we were kids, we played house or maybe war or other things. Now let's try and play the decolonized university. So what are the rules? Like with Monopoly, we have talked about the current rules of the colonial marketized university. Let's try and imagine a different one, like the rules of the cooperative version of Monopoly. What are the rules of the decolonized university? What are its goals? And then importantly, because that's about the paradigm that shapes it, who designs them and who decides who designs them? And how do we hack maybe our current institutions to move in this direction? So I'll stop sharing again, and I'll ask David to kindly do the same as before. Come back, everyone. It was a good discussion, and I see things appearing now. I will say we have around 20 minutes for the rest of the session. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I will just pick up on one of these things, and then I would say let's just open the conversation. If you have any questions about the whole thing, I'm happy to respond to them. You can of course get in touch get in touch with me, or I'll start sharing the screen. Start sharing the screen again. So let's do it. Let's do the opposite thing. I will share the last slide, which is this one. Thank you, and keep playing together. And that's my address. And I'll use this slide to pick up on one of the post-its that I saw that is about co-creating the rules with the students. I think that's really important, and I think that's what preserved our work in Malaysia from being completely colonial. Yes, there was some surrounding very problematic political aspects, but we were really keen on creating games with the children that made sense for the children in that space. And yes, they also have elements of robotics or whatever was involved in the specific game, but co-creation, I think is really key, and it answers that questions about who decides, designs. And my answer would be we design together, and that's maybe naive, but honestly, I don't see a lot of ways out of the contradiction of in institutional governance. So yeah, I picked up that one. I would just open the conversation to considering what we're responding to these specific last questions that I posed to you, or we can discuss anything else that you want of this event. And I want to really thank everyone. The chat is so rich. The contributions on the post is so great. I'm going to be returning to this document quite a lot. And thanks again. And ask me or tell me anything.
I have a question for you, Luca. I love the distinction between games as systems and play and learning going together, and play communities versus, these play structures. When you design an assignment in a class and you're trying to get to a specific learning outcome, do you have any thoughts of how you can kind of keep the balance between co-creation and anarchy, or potentially creating a game system that just goes in a direction that's far from curriculum? I mean, I feel like the meta rule we have is curriculum, right? We're supposed to teach our stuff.
I think, no, I understand what you're saying. For full disclosure, and this is again because of my different origin. The first time I heard learning outcomes, I've been working in university for around 5 years as a teaching assistant in some capacity in Italy, after which I moved to the UK when I finished my PhD. And that's when I heard for the first time learning outcomes. And it was completely like, why are you doing this? Why are you spoiling? This is spoilers. Don't tell me the outcomes of this. I want to discuss a big topic. I want to engage with some big topic and see what happens, and be very transparent. I mean, of course, today when I did this talk, I had some things that I wanted to share to you, but I think I'm quite transparent about my politics, about my ideas, about what I think it's important. But I do not necessarily have in mind how this is going to end. I want to be surprised myself. Now, this is easy because working in education, it's this kind of meta discipline where you are working towards differentiation. I mean, the preferred outcome is that each and every student is a different and independent thinker. If I was teaching surgeons or people that need to build bridges to very specific specifications, that would be very different, of course. But I can answer for my discipline of education, and I can say, let's discuss big problems, and then let's see what happens. And I probably didn't answer the question.
No, I think that's fair. And I mean, maybe this is why there's still a distinction in higher education between professional schools and the arts, you know. In professional schools are supposed to prepare you a specific set of technical skills, and everything else is sort of an art. Even things like business are an art, or I mean, science is kind of an art.
I think that there's a balance. There's a spectrum and there's a balance. I'm probably on one extreme opposite of that spectrum, and therefore I consider the other opposite of technical, just teaching technical skills. I think it can be a bit short-sighted. It's necessary, of course, but it can be short-sighted because things change very fast, and have always changed very fast. Now there's this illusion that change is amplified by the pandemic, but I think that that's how society always is. It changes, and we need to have people that are ready for that.
Can I say something here? Because I mean, my husband's a surgeon, so definitely, yeah, surgery, you probably don't want to just let them play around. But I'm a computer scientist originally before I got a PhD in education. And around me were a lot of guys who had been hacking and playing around with computers since they were 10 years old, and nobody taught them. They were learning it in ad hoc ways. And of course, computer science programs in universities were boring for them. They were teaching them the rules. I mean, you want to learn that, but that's not. I realized after I finished that they were more computer scientists than I am because of all the things they did outside the institution to learn, you know. So I think even like, and with engineering, they have this engineering sense that they don't teach, but that some people have, and they develop it. So it's kind of like, what does it mean to be an engineer versus to do engineering? So I think there's both. So yeah, maybe you teach some of the technical, but I think even in the harder disciplines, the hard sciences, I think there's still room for something else. But I have a different question for you, Luca. So with Andreotti, yeah, okay.
Just add a comment to that. I think a lot of the outcome orientation lies with the marketized nature and transitional nature of education.
Very neoliberal, technical, yeah.
I pay a lot of money, so I want to know what I'm paying for. And of course, I'm not just paying lots of money to have access to a playground, but there's a problem in there. And that's just a very quick comment. And sorry to interrupt you, Maha.
I put a link in there about curriculum theory because there are so many other approaches to curriculum that exist and they're used. It's not that for years, it's not even new. It's just that for some reason universities like to use learning outcomes instead. But and definitely the neoliberal and the marketization. My question related to Andreotti's work, because I love her work, but then when I get to that third part of beyond hard and trying, like, questioning everything, because everything, the basis of everything is modernity, and therefore it's unfixable. And I get the hacking part. I don't understand, like, how to apply what she's talking about because I think the end of that would be that you just totally deconstruct universities and burn it all down. But then when you do that, you're creating even more inequality because some people would have nowhere, like, you know, people who are even less privileged rely on education for some level of social mobility, I think, and some economic. I mean, the economic is important for people who need it. They need the job, right? If they're not just there to develop as a human, they need to actually work too. So I don't know, how do you think about that level?
I think with the that model, no, I think even as a guts feeling, I think we had a similar reaction. I get to the hacking, and I'm okay with that because of my background. Then I see hospicing, and I'm like, and that's also because of my personal family history. I spent enough time in hospices and around letting things die or taking care of things that die. I don't know if that's exactly where we want to be, although I understand her position. I see hacking in a way, and of course it becomes a very political proposition about building dual power. So you build the new world in the shell of the old one. You are in the university, and this is a quote from a friend here in Coventry from Gurnam Singh. You are in the university, but not of the university. So if there's something that you can get away with that goes towards social justice And it's not really part of your job description. Well, you do it and you ask forgiveness later. And that's how hopefully, and that, I mean, that's dangerous maybe, and I'm being recorded and all of that. But that's how you nudge these institutions towards something different, because at the moment you don't have the capacity for big change all at once. You can do that small building. It's prefigurative politics, and it's building the new within the old, and hoping that no one notices. Or no one that we could shut it down notices. I hope I answered at least to a point. Thank you. There's a question from Jess.
Thank you. Luca, I wonder if this concept of students using all these different kinds of what instructors might describe as nefarious ed tech quote unquote solutions to beat these rules that we keep adding to this virtual learning game. I'm thinking of Respondus, lockdown, and all these surveillance technologies. I recently learned of Bueller.com, which will join a Zoom class for you as a student and put your name in the actual Zoom window. It's passive right now, but they're looking to make it a little bit more active. So does this, in your view, the student behavior relate to this conversation of hacking or what you were talking about in terms of dual power? And if so, or maybe even if not, what should instructors take from that? Like, how can we read this behavior through the lens of gamification or play?
I think I'm gonna pick up again on some issues that I discussed at the other talk where I met David and Lisa. There's lots of different cultural perspectives around, for example, cheating. So in Italian, in English, you use cheating for cheating at an assessment, cheating on your partner. What else? There's a third use. Well, cheating at games. In Italian, you have three verbs. You use barare only for games and never for anything else than games. You don't barare with your partner, you betray your partner, and that's a strong ethical qualification. With assessment, you don't cheat, you copy, copiare. So there's a very different ethical load on different ways of attaching things to assessment. And I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot about my cultural perspective also because I want to highlight, although as a white European male, but there are many, many different pedagogical cultures, and the coloniality of Anglo-Saxon academia is also in that. 80–90% of Italian examinations are vivas, and you avoid a lot of issues that you have with proctoring and with surveillance of students. You have a discussion with them, and because you are a trained professional, or at least it's supposedly, you are able to assess whether they master that area of knowledge. When I raise this here in the UK, students are immediately terrified. Oh no, I don't want to have vivas. That's, oh my God. And that's where we link back to the game point. The staff tells me that that's unfair. We need a level playing field, and that's why we have all the mechanized systems of submission, because we want things to be fair for everyone. Well, the level playing field, it's really a big scam, like employability. They talk about employability. They say they can teach you employability. Then you look at employability data, postgraduate, graduate employment data, and you know which sector, which demographics are disadvantaged in that. And of course, that's not because they're worse at learning employability skills. That's because there are structural disadvantage. And when you know something about, well, of course, about sociology of education, but also about game design, that's where all this discussion of rules and goals comes in. The level playing field, you can't create that mechanically, you can only create that relationally. And I think I ranted a bit, and I'm sorry, but I hope I did address your question in some capacity. But it's very hard to have that different relationship again when people pay so much. Having payment makes relationship much harder, because there's a transitional space, transactional dynamic in there. Did that answer your question in some way?
Yes, thanks so much. I was jotting down the last thing you said so I could tweet it later.
Anything?
So we probably got time for maybe one more really meaty question. Does someone have a real zinger or something that's just gnawing on them? Well, I would be happy to ask you one that it's kind of a framing, it's like a bookend with my other question. To decolonize education is to have the teacher as well as the student kind of question the rule set, right? I mean, I think we've established that pretty clearly. I think it's incumbent upon teachers then to really question the rule set and take the lead in challenging those rules. I mean, I think that's been a big part of what professors at play is to be at play as a professor. I'm curious though, what does it feel like to give that power to students? And you know, how do you teach students to break the rules in a way that doesn't break the game, I guess, entirely? How do you teach them to rewrite and not just become anarchists? And I'm speaking as an American who people seem all of a sudden to want to just rewrite the whole damn thing.
Well, let me make another political premise.
Please.
Libertarian and anarchist in the US have a very different meaning from libertarian and anarchist in Europe. So there is a strong cooperative tradition of rebellious movements, let's say, in Europe that are not about let's just tear down the state and everyone for himself. It's about having building those structures from the grassroots. So in part, I reject your premise. But aside from this, I will say that it's difficult. It's difficult because that kind of freedom that you try to bring to them is scary, and especially in this transactional system, they don't necessarily want it or are used to it. Now I teach mostly at the postgraduate level. So it's easier because there are different expectations. There is a strong expectation of autonomy, so it makes more sense. When I was teaching at the undergraduate level for the first couple of years that I was here, I had some trouble because students didn't necessarily like being confused or being set free or being asked to co-create. But then you get people 2 years later saying, oh, that module was great. Thank you. That was my first actual research module. But my module evaluation was submitted 2 years before, and it didn't look that good, I will say. So I think, and that's a lot about coloniality. Again, in conversation with students here, one of the topics that emerges most that is not closely about curriculum, but surrounds it is time. The United Kingdom or the British Empire literally decided where time starts, and then we impose these blocks on everyone, and that's how it is. But framing the time to learn in a different way runs against that. So decolonizing time, I think it's a prerequisite of decolonizing education. But then, as Maha was hinting, I don't know if we are looking at the university in the same sense that we look at it now, and that's a much bigger question that I can answer now. You're muted.
Thank you so much for that. And I think I speak for everyone saying I appreciate your efforts to help think about this and bring the issue to the forefront. So a big virtual round of applause for Luca. We've got your, hopefully we've got your information posted if you want to stay in touch with Luca, or of course, stay in touch with everyone through the Professors at Play listserv and the blog. Eventually we might launch a newsletter. I want to let everyone know March 16th, Julie Steffens de Jong is going to do a kind of a practicum about how to design virtual escape rooms. So we'll switch from the big pressing issue of decolonizing education to some really kind of fun and games and kind of the mechanics of how you might build some activities. And maybe we'll challenge her to think about how she can co-create with her students or your students as well. Thank you again, Luca. Thanks for staying up with us. It's so wonderful to have you talk, and I hope that we will hear from you again soon.
Of course, and thank you so much, everyone, for your contribution, for a very interesting and amazing conversation. And yes, we'll be in touch, and feel free to get in touch. I put my address in the chat, and I hope I will see many of you sooner or later.